Hey, earlier in Hebrews, and I think timeline-wise, and the kids are heading off to kids' church. If you see they're heading out that way, I forgot to mention that. Anyway, as the kids head off to kids' church, we in Hebrews, I believe this would have been like last year technically, because it was a little while ago. So like November. So you guys remember all the sermons from then, right? You have them down. In fact, it's funny because this week's chapter is kind of like, it's a complicated one really to get into. And so I thought about skipping it because you wouldn't even notice maybe that I'd skip chapter 7. You'd be like, did I miss that week? No, but earlier in Hebrews, we read a verse, verse 14 says, "So then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he has faced some of the same testings we do, yet did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy and find grace to help us when we need it most." So Jesus understands our weaknesses. Jesus goes through life just like we did, and he was different from us, but still he can understand us because he's been through the things similar to we have. And a theologian said this, and I like how they said it. Not that Jesus shared in our experience of sin. The author makes it clear he did not, but he did share in our experience of being tempted, a difficult aspect of life that all too often leads to sin. And I think that's something we can all pretty much relate to. Is there anyone here without sin? Go ahead and cast the first stone. Anyway, one of the things that really sets Christianity apart from other faiths, other religions, is the fact that, our God becomes one of us. He experienced temptation, endured testing, and says he faced all the same testings we did, but did not sin. Now, I always use biking analogies because I like to bike, and a couple of us like to bike. Not Drew's kind of bike with a, gas and everything, but, you have to provide your own gas. I biked again this week, and the Delaware Hills, and I don't mean the two bumps on the, we call those the bumps because they're not really, hills or mountains or anything. And, but we have the Delaware Hills, the bikers, those who biking, we call the Delaware Hills are the winds because there's like a ridiculous amount of wind because there's nothing to stop it. And so I was going out Westville Road because that's one of the ways I start. And the wind was so bad, I was at like 8 miles an hour, which may sound for you, if you don't bike, that sounds like maybe, you're moving. You're not. But I was pedaling as hard as I could and going 8 miles an hour. And it was horrible. And some of you have been there. It's one of those horrible, horrible things. But, that it's kind of, life can be hard. Sometimes things push against you. And the temptation was, honestly, because I was biking alone especially, and I was like, well, let's just stop. Nobody knows I'm doing this. I could just turn back in. I could turn back around, hit ice cream at Trey Sorelli. They got ice skating now. I could do that. I'm done. No one knows. Maybe they'll think I did a long ride. I don't know. I could sit around in my biking stuff like, yes, I did a long ride today. A good mile. But, the temptation to stop running. But, we press on. And we have a high priest who understands how hard that is. Those of you who have biked before, you can sympathize because you've been there when it burns your thighs because you're pressing against it. And we have a great high priest who doesn't just, he knows what it's like because he's been through life. And that's an important, for me, aspect of all of Christianity because we have a God who sat on the throne, came down, lived a life we couldn't, and he could sympathize with us because he's been there. He's done that. Even got a T-shirt. And so anyway, I did kind of joke. I was thinking about skipping chapter 7, and no one would know because you would be like, "Oh, did we do 7? Did I miss that week? Was that a COVID week?" It's 2022 now, and it's like we're still a little off. But here's the thing: we preach through the books of the Bible, and sometimes we'll hit sections that are maybe a little more intricate than maybe all of us are excited about digging into. And at times, maybe, explaining an answer to something that we aren't questioning. And here's the kind of, we're going to straddle two ditches today, and hopefully we'll stay on the road. If we go one side, we obsess over all the details in the passage. And I generally break down almost every word or phrase because I see something cool in there and I want to share it. And so we can obsess over details, and then it would be like 25 weeks here. Or we could just kind of like ignore it, and then you might believe some crazy things. I've even seen some crazy things about this one. So we're going to continue in Hebrews 7. We're going to try to stay on the road, not fall in the ditch. So background, Jesus, high priest. Starting chapter 7, verse 1. This Melchizedek was king of the city of Salem and also a priest of God Most High. When Abraham was returning home after winning a great battle against the kings, Melchizedek met him and blessed him. Abraham took a tenth of all he had captured in battle and gave it to Melchizedek. The name Melchizedek means king of justice, and king of Salem means king of peace. And so Melchizedek, and those of you who like Hebrew kind of stuff and different things, names in the Bible have meanings. Like sometimes we just, maybe you name like your dog for certain reasons. Like we named ours Loki because he's he's crazy, so like Loki, but then loco, it kind of sounds like that. So I kind of double meaning there. He's a little crazy. Love the dog, but he's a little nuts. But Loki fits him. If you've met Loki, you're like, yeah, it's a Loki. A little mischievous. Stole my dinner last night. Glad I got dinner because when I got home, he'd eaten it. He can reach it, he did so good too, and then he was mischievous. Anyway, so the names often have meanings, and so Melchizedek is kind of two words, and those of you who maybe know other languages and things, it's like Melchizedek. So he's the king. Malek, Malek, and of righteousness, and he's the king of justice, king of peace. He says where he was king is Salem, and that means some of you that sounds like shalom, salam alaikum, all that depending on your language skills and things. So he's the king of righteousness, the king of justice. The New Living Translation translates it. There's a connection between righteousness and justice. I would spend a lot of time explaining that. It's a really interesting thing and thought, but we're not gonna land there again. We're gonna land in a ditch if we do. And so Abraham he honors this king of righteousness, the king of peace, and. Now here's the thing: if you were to read the Bible the first time, anyone ever try to New Year start in Genesis? Anyone? Or again, so you know my faith journey, I was really convicted that the Bible was something I needed to read. And I figured it was on the final exam. I kind of explored a bunch of other things, and I was like, well, I really feel like God, and I think there's something about this book, and I haven't read much. I've tried a little bit, and so I didn't know anything about the Bible. We didn't have the internet. Well, we had the internet barely in those days. It's like mostly Indian food recipes, which would be fine with me if that's all that was on there now. That and maybe Star Wars memes, and pictures of puppies. But I remember I grabbed the Bible and I started reading it in Genesis because I thought, okay, it's the beginning. That's where you start, right? And so if you read it, there's some stories, there's cool stories, there's some funny things. But I remember getting to Genesis 14, and there's this story of all these kings are fighting. Now, I'm not going to read all the names of the kings, mainly because they're really hard to say, and I'd like to impress you and make you think I'm really smart. And if I butcher those names, you'd be less impressed. Anyway, so a bunch of kings go off to war, and the idea is, we think of kings, we think of whole countries. Kings would be like little regions and cities and things, and so they're kind of fighting, and some kings rebel and others fight back, and they join with other kings and form alliances, because people are just bad through history if you study it. They have the potential for great good, but they also have the potential for great evil, and they will take your stuff. I've seen enough apocalyptic movies that I'm like, man, we go back to those times. So, anyway. And so there's these kings are fighting over money, and then they would Abram, now, if you read the story, and Abram is the same guy as Abraham. So just to kind of throw that in there for those who get who's Abram and how's he related to Abraham? And he's got his nephew's name is Lot because he saw him more than just a little. And so these kings are fighting. Lot gets like swept away because he was living over by this city, and he gets captured. And that's like not good things happen from that. And Lot gets carried off, all his stuff and everything. Abram finds out because the guy escapes, tells him. So Abraham takes off with a posse of his dudes, and they kind of in battle, just take over. They win. They get back the people. They get back all the money, all the stuff, if you will. And it says, Genesis 14 is where we see Melchizedek show up. And he says this, after Abraham returned from his victory over, see, that's why, Kedorlaomer? Yo, keto. It's keto. This is keto in the Bible. There you go. Some of you are happy with that. And all his allies, the king of Sodom, went to meet him in the valley of Shavah, which is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, the priest of God Most High, brought Abram some bread and wine. And Melchizedek blessed Abram with this blessing. Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has defeated your enemies for you. Then Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of all the goods he had recovered. So he tithes to him. He gives 10%. And this is, you're like someone, oh, we're going to preach about tithing? Not now. Hebrews 7:3 says, there's no record of his father or mother or any other of his ancestors, no beginning or end to his life. He remains a priest forever, resembling the Son of God. So he just he shows up out of nowhere, right? Like, and if you're reading the Hebrew Bible the first time, you're reading Genesis, this dude just shows up. I didn't know who he was. I remember reading it going, who is this dude, Melchizedek? Or, you're trying to, because again, you're trying to pronounce biblical names and you have no idea. First time you're reading through the Bible, if you can't pronounce biblical names, you are in great company. I actually find it easier if you read them in Hebrew, so I would encourage everyone to learn Hebrew this afternoon. Don't you wish it was like Matrix style? We could just plug it in. I know Hebrew. Anyway, so dude comes out of nowhere. And so genealogies are so important in the ancient world. Where did you come from and everything. He just kind of shows up. And in the priesthood, we'll see, you kind of had to be descended from Levi to get that Levitical priesthood. Dude comes out of nowhere, kind of like a car in your blind spot. You're like, what's this dude doing here? And so who is this guy? Hebrews chapter 7, verse 4. Consider how great this Melchizedek was. Even Abraham the patriarch of great Israel recognized this by giving him a tenth of what he had. So qualifications of Melchizedek, Abraham the patriarch gives him 10%. The only analogy I could find with this, and I feel bad using this analogy, but this is the only thing I could think of. Anyone ever see Goodfellas? It's funny because we were watching a movie the other night and I was like, how come I always root for the thief and the bad guy? And my wife's like, well, when they make him the main character. I'm like, yeah, that's it. Because they make him the main character, you're rooting for a guy and you realize everything this guy is doing is against what I believe, but you're kind of rooting for him. You watch a heist movie or something. Anyway, if you watch Goodfellas, it's a mob movie and they rob some people and everything. And they always give Paulie, his percentage, his cut. And that's kind of what I think of it. You cut because he's the head guy. There's this idea that someone's above you if you're giving them a cut of things and they didn't do anything. And so that's kind of how I picture Melchizedek. He's a good fella. But anyway, terrible analogy. That's all I got. Anyway, so it shows though that Abraham honors Melchizedek. And again, is this guy? He's a few lines in the Old Testament, and then he pops up one time in the book of Psalms. But it says this. Hebrews 7, verse 5. Now, the law of Moses required that the priests who are descendants of Levi must collect a tithe from the rest of the people of Israel who are also descendants of Abraham. But Melchizedek, who was not a descendant of Levi, collected a tenth from Abraham. And Melchizedek placed a blessing upon Abraham, the one who had already received the promise of God. And without question, the person who has the power to give a blessing is greater than the one who's blessed. Okay, that's a lot in there. Bottom line, Melchizedek is greater than the priests that show up in the Old Testament. He precedes him, the guy who, Abraham tithes to him. Now, most of us are not concerned about this, right? Did you wake up this morning and go, where did the Levitical priest go? And, are we offering sacrifices today at church? And why don't we do that? Anyone wonder if we were going to slaughter sheep or anything? Yeah. No, you did wonder, okay. Smart Alex. We always get the smart Alex to sit to the front so I can hear them better because I'm getting older and I can't hear the comments in the back. I just nod a lot. And then if you have a mask on, I can't tell what you're saying anyway. Anyway, but most of us are concerned with that, but it's kind of a big thing. And it's funny because here's a little side thing. I think it's interesting. Christians so often want to like reinstitute all these Old Testament laws and things. Read the book of Hebrews. Because you'll see that, I mean, it was good stuff, and we'll hit on it later, but it was to serve a purpose and point us to something. It wasn't something that we do forever. And I remember reading the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, the first time. I'm reading through, and I'm like, I'm literally memorizing how to slaughter sheep. Because, again, I thought it was on the final. Because, when you're in school, you're like real concerned about what's on the final. And I'm like, I don't know what happens. I do some stupid stuff. Y'all know I do stupid stuff. There's a good chance I'm going to die young. I can't believe I always say I live past my life expectancy. Anyone is surprised you live past 35? I mean, the dumb stuff we do. I mean, dudes, I have a text group we send and it's like stupid things. And it's like, there was one this week and it was like, there was like a camper lifted up on like some sort of like lift and they ran a ladder across, from a window. Some of you've seen it, and they're like moving furniture out. I'm like, that makes sense to me under the right circumstances. Definitely an OSHA violation. Some of you are like, mostly, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be sexist, but the women are like, that's a bad idea. And that's why statistically you live longer. Because I'm like, I could see under the right circumstances where that's a good idea. And I'm kind of thinking that would be fun. And if that was happening, I would stop and want to join in. Anyone? No, okay. Anyway, how did I get on that? My gosh. Most of us are, it's interesting because if you look on the internet, there's often, people like, well, I love to read the criticisms of Christianity and faith. And I know that sounds not faith, that person, but faith in general. But, I love to read the criticisms because I kind of want to understand the culture and things. And sometimes I'll watch some TV and movies and things sort of as research because they reflect their culture. One of the things I always see on like forums and stuff, and some of you have been to these forums, people get mad. They're like, but, Christians say this, but you say the Bible, but, you eat shellfish. And that's because I'm shellfish. But no, there's a reason that certain things were kind of, you couldn't eat that, but we're not under the law. And then it was interesting this week, I was reading something, and Christians who say, we're New Testament Christians, which I'm thinking, well, you would have to be a New Testament Christian because that's where Christ shows up. I mean, he is in the Old Testament. There's allusions to him. But what sometimes people mean by that is like we don't do anything with the old. Like we just kind of like cut that off and go, glad that's over. But that, I wish I had my Bible actually up here, but if I had something maybe more stable than a stand, I could bring my Bible, but I put it here and then it's like kind of, anyway. But if Bible's like about that thick, if you're going to get rid of that much of it, that much of that, that's a lot of stuff. And there's good things in there. It points to Jesus, good stuff. And so, basically, kind of bottom line is the law and the system of sacrifices was never meant to last forever. It points us to Jesus. And so we don't just get rid of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, good stuff, but sometimes you have to understand it in context. And people on the internet want to understand everything, and they'll like bring out one verse, and they're like, what about this verse? And I'm like, oh my gosh, do you have 4 hours for a lecture for me to explain to you some basic things? Because I can tell you don't understand context and literary things, and you have a bad translation, you have a poor understanding of grammar too, because I've seen how you write on the internet. Anyway, anyone else judge people by punctuation on the internet? You can tell I'm old because I text and I use punctuation. Apparently, if you're younger, you don't use the punctuation. Who here uses punctuation when they text? Who doesn't? Yeah, that's like the younger folks. It's you probably think I'm mad because I'm like using punctuation, man. He's all like, no, I just can't help it. I've written so many papers in my life. It's like I have to punctuate. I get so distracted during the worship. Like I've in churches and we're worshiping. Worship's great today. I'm up there and I see typos. Oh my gosh. Some of you know what I mean. All I could think about, I have to write them down. I'm going to message someone later. So anyway, my problem, not yours. Anyway, Galatians 3:19. And I think Paul kind of brings this out for those of you who may not kind of see it, but I think chapter 3, verse 19, Galatians. Why then was the law given? It was given alongside the promise to show people their sins. But the law was designed to last only until the coming of the child who was promised. Jesus. Spoiler alert. Skipping down to 21. It says, is there a conflict then between God's law and God's promises? Absolutely not. If the law could give us a new life, we would be made right with God by obeying it. But the scriptures declare that we are all prisoners of sin, so we receive God's promise of freedom only by believing in Jesus. And so by believing and putting our trust in Jesus, we have new life. And the law's purpose was to, in part, to show us our sin. And it curbed sin. Now, and that's where context is so important, because if you look at other ancient Near East cultures and things, and, some people are like, oh, the law says this and that. But if you understand the culture and the context, like some of the things that are in there are actually for the protection of people. So something like, the law of lex talionis, for those of you who know it, eye for an eye. It wasn't like, prescriptive, like if someone wronged you and gouged out an eye, then you go gouge out an eye. The idea was it limits retribution. Kind of something some offense would happen, and people would go way overboard. Kind of like someone steps on your sneaker and you shoot them. No. A step on a sneaker for a step on a sneaker. And so in context, a lot of the ancient Near East, things blew up over little things. And so the idea was to limit it. And it exposed sin. Because ultimately, the law shows you can't live up to it, right? And the whole system of sacrifices shows that we are a little jacked up. I know we haven't said that in a while because people got offended. But deep down, I don't care. But... as you know. But, because I always say, we're all a little jacked up. And if you don't think you're a little jacked up, you're really jacked up. And I think the older I get, the more jacked up I realize I am, if you're self-aware. Because you understand that there's things I do that are inconsistent with the life that I proclaim. And it's not horrible stuff. I'm not like sleeping with other people on the weekends or something. But, I'm not big things, but it's like often the little things in our hearts that we realize, man, I preach love, but I'm angry at that guy. Why? Why does that guy cutting me off make me so angry? And there's stuff you got to deal with. You can go talk to a counselor, do a lot of that stuff. But, the laws and the rules expose that I sin. And ultimately, they show our need for a Savior. It's funny because sometimes I think we want to sin just because we're told not to, do certain things. Anyone? Like, if I see a sign that says, do not walk on the grass, what do you want to do? You're like, that must be some good grass to walk on. It's like I would have not wanted to walk on the grass before that. But if I see that sign, man, if you told me don't eat bacon, what's the first thing you want to eat when you get home today? Nice, crispy, good bacon. Do you like your bacon crispy or extra crispy? Because those are the only two ways to eat it. I'm sorry. Man, I remember I had this great vegetarian lasagna one time. It was so good. I sprinkled bacon on top of it. And oh my gosh, it was good. No, I like vegetables too. It's okay. Anyway, kind of like if you're ever like a restrictive diet, unfortunately we all have to have cycles where we're like, I've been eating a little too much of the holidays. Most of us make some like okay, gotta dial it back a little bit. Man, when you're like trying to not eat certain things, it seems like they're everywhere. You're like trying to be good and like someone makes brownies when you get home. I'm just saying, it was like, oh gosh, I'm just gonna, eat brownies. I don't care. But ultimately the whole thing points to Jesus. And Galatians 3:24 says this, let me put it another way. The law was our guardian until Christ came. It protected us until we could be made right with God through faith. And now that the way of faith has come, we no longer need the law as our guardian. And so the law kind of protected, trained, and taught. It became the background for who Jesus is. And so we can understand who Jesus is because of the context of the law. It's kind of like a tutor. If you have in Greco-Roman culture, you'd have one that was sort of, you would train them up to be, even someone who's a king has someone over them to train and protect them and teach them, but ultimately then that person becomes the boss. It reminds me of, I was thinking of yesterday, we were working on the Mustang. Some of you know I love my Mustang. 66 Mustang, a lot of fun to work on, very frustrating too, because those of you know, Josh and I were working on it, and so we took off 2 bolts because we had to change the thermostat, and could not get those 2 bolts back in, but Josh did a great job. So, good job, Josh. But, we're working on it, we're getting it. But, I work on it, which I didn't just tell Josh, go change thermostat, right? Because it's something he needs to learn how to do. I learned at some point, and then I'm helping him, I'm tutoring him, if you will. Last week, we talked about the tires. All my maintenance things, I don't know if I have kids to help do all the maintenance, because I want the help, but it's also kind of to teach them to be independent, right? That someday they're going to have, like I told you, we had the wheel lock on the thing, and when we turned it, it snapped in half, and then we had to learn how to get one off and everything. Fortunately, YouTube is helpful for that kind of thing. I got a lot of nods up here. All YouTube certified mechanics sitting here in front of the room. But it's like, we do all this stuff because we want to expect, it teaches them, it prepares them, it trains them. And so the law is kind of like training wheels. It was put in place to help people, to get the people of God going in the right direction, but you're not wearing training wheels unless you got a physical problem when you're like 50. If someone as a joke was going to get me training wheels for my bike, because I appreciate you guys some of y'all got me a chainsaw for Pastor Appreciation. Thank you, Jesus, because, man, I love to cut some stuff up. We got trees everywhere, and it's still at our house. Anyway, one year they were going to get me training wheels as a joke, because I occasionally get gag gifts from some of you. And they figured out they were too expensive, so we get it. But it would be weird if I was riding around, and I'm going by Trace Sorelli, and you're sitting there eating some ice cream or skating or something, and I'm on training wheels. You're going to laugh, right? You're going to be like, what is Jeff doing, man? That kid. Anyway, and the law was the training wheels. It was to get us to where Jesus is. Chapter 7, verse 8. The priests who collect the tithes are men who die, so Melchizedek is greater than they are because he were told he lives on. In addition, we might even say that these Levites, the ones who collect the tithe, paid a tithe to Melchizedek when their ancestor Abraham paid a tithe to him. For although Levi wasn't born yet, the seed which he came from was in Abraham's body when Melchizedek collected the tithe from him. Okay, it's kind of saying they weren't around yet, but they were Abraham was their father. The best analogy I come to this is Josh went snowboarding when he was -7 months. Because we measure when you're born, and we didn't know Denise was pregnant. We went snowboarding. So I got a picture of Denise and Josh snowboarding, but you can't see Josh. And so the idea was he was in there. We were just snowboarding. It's that kind of thing. And again, some of this is cultural that makes, it's more of a concern that they would have. But I think you need to understand this because it's important. It's still in there. Again, the Bible is like a software agreement, right? If you're a believer and a follower of Jesus, you're like, oh, yes, I believe in the Bible. But we don't know what's in it because you click yes to that software agreement, but how many people have actually read the whole thing? Even tech people are like, man, every time they update, would you like to be sent a copy of this? No, I got 20,000 unread emails in my personal thing. I don't need another one. Although I'm trying to get to 100,000 unread emails because then I feel important when I delete them all. Anyone ever do that too? Just highlight all your emails and just delete them. You're like, if I haven't read it by now, I'm not going to read it anyway. If it was really important, you would have called me or texted me, right? Not work emails. If you send me one from the work address, I'll make sure I'll get back to you in a timely manner within 1 year. Within one pandemic, I will get back to you. No, I'm kidding. I'll get back fast to you. Except on the weekends. On the weekends, man, you message me, I may not get back to you. And then sometimes I just forget you got to message me. Anyway, so the priesthood of Levi, on which the law was based, could have achieved the perfection God intended. Why did God need to establish a different priesthood with a priest in the order of Melchizedek instead of the order of Levi and Aaron? Priesthood of Melchizedek gets established afterwards, and we'll see it. You're going to see it. Psalm 110:4 is the other place Melchizedek shows up, 1,000 years before Jesus. The law points us to our need for a Savior, but ultimately we need a different high priest. And it says, and if the priesthood is changed, the law must also be changed, permitted, for the priest we're talking about belongs to a different tribe, whose members have never served at the altar's priest. What I mean is our Lord is from the tribe of Judah, and Moses never mentioned priests coming from that tribe. Nutshell. Okay, priests come through Levi, if you read the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. Messiah comes through Judah. You're not supposed to be both priest and king. And you see at least one instance I can think of right off the top of my head where someone tries to do that, doesn't work out. So it's kind of like to be both. There's these prophecies of the Messiah to come. We see things and we're like, how can he be both? And I had to look up the show. There was this show years ago. It was like Brooklyn something, and it was like very short-lived sitcom, and there was like a superhero guy that shows up, and he had wings and a cape, and the guy's like, you don't need both. And I always, that lives, free space in my head. I cannot forget that, because, how can you be both? And so I hear that guy still saying that. You don't need both. Anyway, he fulfills both. And so this change has been made very clear. Since a different priest who is like Melchizedek has appeared, Jesus became a priest, not by meeting the physical requirement of belonging to the tribe of Levi, but by the power of a life that cannot be destroyed. The psalmist pointed this out when he prophesied, again, 1,000 years before, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And there's all these breadcrumbs, these dots. And it was like, I've often said, like, the Hebrew Bible points to Jesus, and Jesus kind of clears that up on the road to Emmaus, which maybe we'll talk about when we get closer to Easter. But there's all these like little dots and things. And as a kid, you ever do those little dot pictures? It's like you connect one to the, and it's just a bunch of dots, and you start like connecting them, and you're like, oh, that's what it is. And sometimes it is that with the Hebrew Bible. Be patient with me here. Yes, the old requirement about the priesthood was set aside because it was weak and useless, for the law never made anything perfect. But now we have confidence in a better hope through which we draw near to God. Confidence in a better hope. And the whole, we have a different hope. Most religions talk about how to come to God, but we have a God who comes to us. John 1, verse 14 says, so the Word became human and made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness, and we've seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son. The message says, the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. I love that. Jesus moved into the neighborhood. God came to us. That is the exciting thing about the Christian faith. We don't have to try to get to him. He's already trying to get to us. We have to take our step. We have to accept. We have to believe. We have to, one step and you're already there. It's not 1,000 steps on a journey to get to God. It's one step and he's already there. And we can be confident in our relationship. And we don't need a new priest now because our priest lives forever. I'm not a priest. It's funny, some of the kids joke because, with Josh, I've told you before, they're like, well, your dad's a priest. And I'm like, well, not really, because, I have kids, and I know there's some tradition you can. But it's not, you don't need me to mediate between you and God, right? If you need prayer, come to me. I'll pray for you. If you, want me to help you with something, pray for you. I love people, we'll totally. But here's the thing. You can come to Julie just as much as you can come to me, right? You can come to Dana just as much as you can come to me. But, we're just believers, and not that they can't come to the rest of you. But just pointing to a couple of people who happen to be on my right because that's my pointy hand. But, we don't need someone to mediate between me and God because we go directly to Jesus. And that's the exciting thing about this passage that, again, we can lose, we end up in the wrong ditch and all the details, is now Jesus is our high priest. We come to him. We have access to the Father. You don't need me. I'm gone. No. See ya. Anyway. We don't need a new priest because our priest still lives. Spoiler alert for Easter. He lives. He is risen. A couple of you got it. We're going to start now. There's tradition if you say he is risen, you say. He is risen. Okay, we'll start now. This new system was established with solemn oath. Aaron's descendants became priests without such an oath, but there was an oath regarding Jesus. We said, the Lord has taken an oath and will not break his vow. You are priests forever. Again, Jesus forever. Because of this oath, Jesus is the one who guarantees the better covenant of God. There are many priests under the old system, but death prevented them from remaining in office. Because Jesus lives forever, his priesthood lasts forever. Therefore, he is able once and forever to save those who come to God through him. He lives forever to intercede on their behalf. Jesus is praying for you. Again, I'll pray for you, but you got Jesus. Again, as a part of a community, as the people of God, we pray for each other, we counsel each other, we get, not professional counseling, that's another thing, but I'm saying we give counsel, advice, we learn from each other, all important things, but ultimately, you don't need me to intercede on your behalf because you go directly to the Father. You don't need me again. I don't have job security. Again, spoiler alert, Jesus dies for our sins. Jesus raised life for our justification. He continually represents us to the Father. Hebrews 5:1 said, every high priest is a man chosen to represent other people in their dealings with God. He presents their gifts to God as others offer sacrifices for their sin. The high priest of Judaism, he was a mediator between God and people. He represented God and people. And it's kind of like legal transactions. Now, man, buying this building, all kinds of legal stuff. Because we're doing title search. Some of you work in law offices. The church that we're trying to buy this doesn't actually own it. Because it doesn't exist. Because legally, hundreds of years ago, things were different names. So it's we got to go through more paperwork and things. Anyway, so we have to have a lawyer represent our interests. Because if someone ever came back and said, well, that church didn't own it when they sold it to you, and that's what title searches are all about, at least that's what I understand about. But they go back, and it's it existed in a different form a couple hundred years ago, right? That denomination and association is long gone. So you got to, connect the dots again and all kinds of things and paperwork. And so the lawyer is representing our interest, right? We want to make sure that everything's okay. And Jesus is your lawyer before God. He's representing you. And so you have someone to represent you. He's the mediator. And the representation of Jesus is much better than under the Old Covenant, the Hebrew Bible. It says this, for he is the kind of high priest we need because he is holy and blameless, unstained by sin. He has been set apart from sinners and he's been given the highest place of honor in heaven. Unlike those other high priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices every day. They did this for their own sins first and then for the sins of the people. But Jesus did this once for all, and he offered himself as a sacrifice for people's sins. The law appointed high priests who were limited by human weakness, but after the law was given, God appointed his son with an oath, and his son has been made the perfect high priest forever. He's holy and blameless, unstained by sin. Now, I was trying to find the origin of this quote because I hate to quote somebody and not know who said it. And I've heard it before, and the only thing I could find in it was a hymn, but the hymn wasn't old enough that I'm is that where it came from? I don't know. Maybe he, got it from somewhere. But, the line says, I owed a debt I could not pay. He paid a debt I did not owe. That he did not owe. I'll read that again. I owed a debt I could not pay. He paid a debt he did not owe. And so Jesus didn't sin, lived a perfect life, and yet he dies for my sins in my place to bring us back to the Father because of his great love for us. And does not need to offer sacrifices every day. Why don't we need sacrifices anymore? Why weren't any of you thinking, oh man, I need to bring a sheep to church today? Did anyone bring a sheep? Anyone? Good. I do, like you said, a petting zoo up there or something. We don't need that because we have the perfect sacrifice in Jesus. It would be good to have some veal, but we don't need to do it. To be in a relationship with him. 1 Peter 1:18 says, for you know that God paid a ransom to save you from the empty life you inherited from your ancestors. It was not paid with mere gold or silver, which lose their value. It was the precious blood of Christ, with the sinless, spotless Lamb of God. If you're a follower of Jesus, you committed your life to him, you've been redeemed at a great cost, and we have this new life. It's a God paid the ransom. I always think of, like, again, movies. You're going to think all I do is sit around and watch movies, right? But, there's always, like, ransom kind of movies where there's, like, kidnapping and things, and there's all kind of, there's kind of, or there's a lot of kidnapping in the real world. I just prefer not to think of it. I like the movie kidnappings better. Not when they go wrong, though. I hate movies with, such an America. I like the lollipop ending. Everything works. Bad guys get it in the end. Good guys are victorious. Anyone else? Life is hard enough. I don't need to see people like, the bad guys win in a movie. Like the first time you watch Rocky and Rocky doesn't win, I was like, what kind of movie is this? I'm like 12, I don't know, and I'm just like, this is a horrible movie. But then set up Rocky 2 and a whole franchise. Sylvester Stallone was a smart man. But you pay the ransom, you get things back. And so we were ransomed. Not mere gold or silver or Bitcoin. Our redemption comes at this high price. His life is a sacrifice for our sake. And he does it because of his great love for us. And it says, the perfect high priest forever. You don't need a new priest. You don't need a new Melchizedek because we have Jesus in that role now. He's advocating, he's lawyering, he's our advocate to the Father. And so we have a new mediator. We have an eternal mediator. And the better high priest is here. We have a better hope. And we put our faith and our trust in Jesus. We have this new way of life, this new way of living. And it's just simple as saying yes to Jesus, and you have this new way of life, this new way of living. We can live fully knowing him, and we can approach God in a new way.